Alright, been trying to make the gumbo video for years, but always ran out of space on my phone or something happened in the middle. It's really hard. Once you start, you just got to keep going. So we're starting off with just 4 packages of andouille sausage. So 16 sausages I sliced up. We're just rendering a lot of the water out of them mainly and a little bit of fat. Got some great juices in the bottom there. It's going to add a lot of flavor down the road, or at least it's flavor we're not going to lose. But we didn't need all the water in there. And we're going to retain the grease in the pot here and use that as part of our roux. All the rest of the grease that's going in our roux is recovered from other parts of this process. I've got chicken schmaltz here from the 16 chicken thighs that I roasted that are going to go in here. I've got some grease I skimmed from the chicken stock that I made from the scraps of these vegetables and the bones from those chicken thighs, and the skin. So there was a good bit of fat rendered out in there that I've recovered as well. And then the rest of the grease in here is actually skimmed from the last batch of gumbo I made. So it's mostly grease from andouille, as well as some of the chicken and stuff like that. It's got a ton of flavor. I always consider it almost like the sourdough starter of a gumbo batch. Honestly, probably doesn't make that much of a difference versus just starting with oil, but it's part of my whole kind of use the whole buffalo mentality, and something I just enjoy doing when I'm making gumbo, because I want to skim off some of that grease usually anyway. Hate to throw it away. It smells and tastes so good. It's just like concentrated gumbo essence. So anyway, this is looking pretty good. I'm going to pull this in a few minutes. I want to get a little more color on it now that most of the water is steamed out and we're down to mostly grease in there. This was swimming in a bunch of liquid a few minutes ago, but we're almost there. So I'm going to grab a bowl and a ladle so I can get this out of here and leave the grease behind. Alright. Got that for when we're ready for it. This one will be fun to edit, I'm sure. There's going to be lots of downtime. But it's not necessarily downtime, and I'm not sure how interesting it is to watch me frantically stir the roux. Maybe we'll put the full uncut long form up on YouTube. I have a feeling we'll time-lapse the stirring of the roux pretty heavily. Alright, so we're starting to get a little bit of sticking to the bottom in here. I don't want too much of that because that's all going to burn completely charred black when I get to doing the roux. And it won't matter much. You'll see little black flecks sometimes in the gumbo. A lot of that is just carbon from the bottom of the pan, stuff that sticks during the process of making the roux or rendering out the sausage. And it doesn't make it taste burned at all. It just adds rich smoky flavor throughout when you do this and when you really brown up the sausage. But it's sort of a game with myself to keep that to a minimum and still get some good color on the sausage in here. So we're almost there. So the key thing with gumbo, especially when you're making a big batch, is you want everything ready ahead of time. Really, really important to have your mise en place, because you do not have time to be chopping vegetables while your roux is sitting there about to burn. You have to throw your vegetables in when everything's at its hottest and get to stirring, cool the pan down. And then, you can prep the chicken later on if you want, but I just did mine all a day ahead of time, got it all off the bone, and then made stock from that, so it's all going to be homemade stock going in here as well. And that's just, again, it's how I like to do it. Nothing wrong with packaged stock, but I think the homemade stuff tastes better. And someone else on YouTube said once, I forget who it was in a video, that if you make your own stock, you can put the Trinity in it. The Cajun Trinity. You got your bell pepper, celery, and onion. Whereas commercial stock almost always has carrots. And it's not going to kill your gumbo if you got carrots in the stock, but there shouldn't be any normally for traditional gumbo. So just going ahead and making my own here with all the same ingredients that are going in the soup. That's just how I like to do it. I've got a ton of vegetables, so I gotta say this is the biggest batch of gumbo I've ever made, and I'm quite concerned about whether it's all gonna fit in this pot. This is the biggest pot I have. I could use a bigger one. This is as big as my burner is, but just a deeper one would work for me here, because I have filled this up to the brim before. I have a feeling this is going to be a very concentrated batch. After I make it, I might even have to actually dilute Like pull out half of it and add some more liquid in just to dilute it to get a reasonable total volume for all the ingredients I put in. I've got 16 andouille sausages here. I've got 16 chicken thighs. I've got 3 bell peppers and 2 large onions and like, I don't know, half a package of celery, and about half a head of garlic, a few jalapenos. I wish I had more jalapenos, but they were basically out of them at the store. So I got the only 3 that weren't rotted or otherwise looking nasty that were at the store, and they're in here. And since I only had 3, I went ahead and left the seeds in for maximum heat out of them because I do want this to be kind of spicy. Got about 2 cups, maybe a little less than 2 cups of flour. And I'm guessing I'm going to have in total about 1.5 cups, maybe 1 3/4 cups of fat. That's kind of your ratio. You want a little bit more flour than fat for your roux. All right, this is starting to stick now. Let's loosen that up a little bit. Okay, good. Of course, it really only sticks in the middle where it's hottest. Okay, good. Yeah, we're just starting to get a little bit of sticking on the bottom there. But again, that's all going to burn, but no big deal. So here, I want to leave as much of that grease behind as I can. This much sausage would not have fit in this bowl, I think, before I rendered out all this fat and liquid water. Yeah, look at all that. That's awesome grease. Basically no water left in there, just amazing, flavorful, tasty grease from this andouille. All right, got all the sausage out of there. Set this, well, you know what? I'm gonna set it right there. Not because I need it nearby, but because I need my cats not to steal it while my back is turned. So that's all the grease we got left from that. I'm gonna turn this down a little bit so it doesn't burn the little bits that are in there while we melt all the grease that's in here. So let's go ahead and get this out. All right. Came out nicely, no spoon required. And okay, from here on, things don't really stop. I'm gonna crank this heat back up a little bit. And, okay, some of this just came out of the freezer last night. It's still pretty cold. That's the gumbo grease from last time. Everything else has been in the fridge for a day. Okay, we got some heavy browning going on underneath with the stuff stuck here. I'm just gently scraping at that. Don't want to go too hard or this will splash right out of here and splash me right in the face. Probably see little splashes happening. That's all the stuff starting to solidify on the bottom. Now some of this is solids in what I just dumped in here. Because of course I didn't use like a fat separator or anything. This is all just kind of scraped off the top. Or like I just poured out I did the chicken in the oven because I had so much of it. And I just poured the baking trays into a container. I didn't scrape them out thoroughly or anything because you know, a lot of stuff that isn't fat in there too, but most of it's fat. All right, so we got all that loosened up. That's good. We'll still have some burning later, but I'd rather it mostly be flour. Okay, I'm gonna turn this up a little bit now. Get this almost all melted. And you can see that's quite a bit actually. That's probably more than 2 cups of fat. And again, not 100% fat. You can tell because it's kind of milky looking now as opposed to clear. So you can tell it's not all fat, but a whole lot of it is. So I got that heat turned up a little bit. Got the solids off the bottom so we don't have immediate burning. That water that's in here that's mixed in with the fat is going to keep the solids that are in there from burning until it's steamed out. So you got the heat just over, it's like medium high. just over medium really. I'm starting to see bubbles in there. I want all that water to steam out. And it's just going to be a minute. It's not going to be exhaustive. We're not getting every little bit of it out. But hopefully enough. Let's see, we got some bubbling going on now. Gentle stir. So I want this to be pretty hot when I put the flour in. I don't have all day to make this roux. It's quite a bit of it here. So I want this, I've got it up about 2/3 of the way on my electric burner right now, and that's probably good. Okay, so we got a lot of steam coming up now. You can probably see that. That's all that water coming out. Got solid bubbles. When those bubbles stop, the flour goes in immediately. Maybe a little before they stop. Got my flour ready. Set that right there for a moment. Alright. Nothing stuck to the bottom. Getting all that steam out of there. You can see this turning kind of less milky. I don't know if it's showing up on camera, but there's a lot of water coming out, a lot of grease left. Got some nice solids browning in there, but nothing's sticking really. I just think this is a much better base than just straight oil if you have the option. Like I said, I don't think it really makes that much of a difference. I got to test that pretty recently actually, because I made a batch without starting with a gumbo starter, gumbo grease starter. I just made it with vegetable oil. I think I made another batch with olive oil pretty recently, and I don't think I can tell the difference between any of them really if you put a gun to my head. But this one's much more psychologically satisfying for me. Like I said, I don't like throwing out grease that's just full of flavor. It's like the best smelling stuff in my kitchen. Gumbo grease. Getting some roasty caramelization in there. All right. So still a lot of steam coming, but less, and I can see that the grease is much more transparent now. I'm going to go for adding the flour in probably about 30 seconds to a minute here. Meantime, grab myself a bed. Usually have a beer when I'm making gumbo, but doing a sober January, so we'll just have a Coke Zero. All right, that is much less kind of milky looking now. I'll let this off the heat. I think we'll see that's pretty greasy. We can do a little more. Still seeing little wisps of steam come out here. All right, I think we're ready. We'll give it a stir. Yeah, okay, we're definitely ready here. I can see this is hardly any water in there at all now. Okay, here is our flour. So there's no need to just dump this all straight in here. We can go a little slow. Sometimes I'll add like half the flour and then come back and add more. I'm gonna add about a third of this because I think I might have too much flour. Okay, so right away, you can tell we've cooled it down a little bit. And we will be stirring. Of course, we're going to break up all the clumps that want to form in here and everything, but we're going to be stirring this for a minute, so just don't worry about them too much. You're going to have plenty of time to break them up. The whole texture of this is going to change so thoroughly, fundamentally change while we're cooking it. The roux goes through a bunch of stages, and I like a thick roux and a thick gumbo. So some people go with a little less flour than liquid. I don't personally feel that's correct, but I do think it's a matter of taste. At the end of this, I want to have sort of a kind of a slurry that's more solid than liquid, but it's got some liquid in it. Whereas I've seen people who make a roux that is basically liquid at the end. That's just because they use less flour. And no shame in that. It's just what do you want? What are you looking for? So I don't know if you can see, but the clumps are breaking up here. And you can see this is very thick. See, it passes like the spoon test for a thick gravy if I pass the spoon through it. Now this is where things get kind of dangerous. You notice I've got gloves. This stuff's like napalm. Basically, it's so hot, and it sticks to you like jelly because it's just flour and searing oil, and you can get really serious burns. I've got like a bad second-degree burn on my wrist making gumbo, and it can burn through these gloves, but the little tiny flecks that would often just like it, burn me at the microsecond they hit me, those land on the gloves and they cool down immediately. And they don't burn me anymore, so that's why I started wearing these. But you can still get burned pretty bad in your wrists, your arms. Gotta be careful, and even your face. If you push away too fast and you squish it up and it splashes back at you, you're not going to be happy. You're in for a world of hurt. So always take the roux seriously. Treat it with care, and treat it like the dangerous but delicious thing it is. Okay, so now you can see I've added arguably more flour than I should here, but I know from experience this is going to be fine, and it's kind of what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a very thick roux, and you can see color-wise that this is very blonde now. It kind of looks like a blonde brownie, like a brownie without chocolate in it. But it's going to be dark chocolate by the time we're done with it. So from this point on, we're just going to stir, and we're rarely going to stop stirring for more than a second or two, because it will burn very, very quickly. I'm not cranking the heat down, and I want to minimize the amount of stuff stuck to the bottom here, so the way you do that is you keep it moving. But again, just be careful how fast you're doing it, because if you have to step away because you gave yourself a second-degree burn on your face while you were stirring it, the whole rest of it's going to burn. You're going to start over completely. And that's not that big a deal, especially if you started with oil from a jug or something. But I mean, you saw where all my fat that I'm making this from came from. It's not like I have a bunch more in the fridge. So for my preferred way of making it, I get one shot at this. But that's okay. This is a little intimidating, like the first time or two you do it, especially because you can just feel the heat radiating off of this. It's like lava. But, you get used to it. You just get in there and stir it. Don't be afraid of it. Just treat it with respect. Try to keep too much of it from caking up on the sides up here, because it doesn't, at least in this pot, it doesn't usually burn on the sides, but it also doesn't, toast up the way I want my roux to. So I'll go around in the early stage here where it's not quite going to burn to the bottom yet, at least not too fast, and I'll do those scrapes on the sides. But the more we toast this, the hotter it gets and the hotter the pan gets here, and I am turning it down just a little bit because my stove gets really, really hot and retains heat a lot. So I'm trying to keep it at kind of a constant temperature, not constantly keep it rising. But the longer this goes on, the less time you have to stir and react, and it just burns in a second. By the time we get to the end here, it's like a delicate dance where, 5 seconds too soon and your gumbo is just not as dark as you want it. Your roux isn't quite as rich and chocolatey brown as you're looking for, but 5 seconds too late and you got kind of a burnt mess. And 5 seconds is probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but I don't think like 45 seconds is. It's really, the stuff goes fast. So I'm gonna take it serious. If I want to cool the pan down, I can just lift it up like that a little bit, but of course that scrapes it up on the side, that pulls it up on the side, so I gotta scrape it back down. But no biggie, the goal here is just to keep it moving. And you can see I got some color building up on the bottom of the pan, and that will continue to darken as we do this, but that's part of why I turn the pan down. I don't want that to burn too fast. Some amount is going to burn on the bottom there no matter what I do, but it's all going to come out in the end. Whew, hand gets tired doing all this. All right, we probably got, well, I'm not going to estimate the time. This is a lot of roux. I turned it down a little too much there. The hotter you got it, the faster it goes, but the more actively you got to stir it. So if you want to kind of take a lot of the stress out of this, there's a bunch of ways to do it. I've heard you can make roux in the oven, and you never have to worry about it burning because you're controlling the temperature in the oven. I've never tried it, but that's probably a pretty straightforward way to do it. You could just turn the temperature down. You might be up here stirring for 45 minutes, but it will eventually get to the brown you're looking for, even at a fairly low temperature, with much less chance of burning. Like I said, though, I don't have all day to make this. I mean, the gumbo is going to take all day. Once I get everything in here, it's going to sit and stew and cook out the roux and get all those flavors mingling. And it's a solid 2 to 3 hours minimum, and it's usually better the next day. Well, usually it's always better the next day. It's thicker, and flavors are better blended, richer. Not that I could ever wait until the next day to have a bowl. I'm not denying myself after a day of smelling it cooking and standing over the stove slaving on it. I'm not about to wait through another overnight before I give it a shot. So I'll always have a bowl and always be like, I'm not sure this is as good as I was hoping it was going to be, and then I'll have it the next morning too, and I'll be like, oh yeah, there it is. So should I save myself that first bowl? Hell no, I shouldn't. Why do you think we work all day? So we can deny ourselves the fruits of our labor? No. That's why we just make a bigger batch, so that you don't even miss that bowl you had the night before. Alright. So this is definitely a lot darker than it was before. If you remember that kind of blonde brownie, this is getting a lot more like caramel now. Now some people online say that you want this the color of a Hershey's chocolate bar, and that's certainly a good starting point. I think regular Hershey's is a little light. I'm going more for like a special dark, maybe a 80% cacao kind of coloring. So we're gonna go until we kind of can't go anymore. And that's the thing, if you don't cook the roux, if you don't get your roux dark enough to start with, your gumbo's never recovering from it. This is your one chance to get a solid flavor base for the soup here. And if you chicken out and you don't get a good dark roux, you're gonna have, a pale caramel gumbo. And I mean, what are we, Papados? No, we're the proud home cooks making the good stuff that we really want to eat at a fraction of the price. So I did the math on this. This is not a cheap pot of soup I'm about to make here. It's a good thing I'm going to get like 30 servings out of it by the time we're done, I hope. And 30 restaurant size servings. Like my size servings, probably 15 or less. But there's 4 packs of sausage in here. I got them on sale, still $22 for the sausage. Got all the chicken on sale too, still I think about $16 for the chicken, so $38. It's like $5 in vegetables in here maybe, so $43-ish. And then yeah, I made the stock myself, so that's pretty much free. Not counting the flour and all the oil I recaptured, so that's all free. So yeah, about a $43 pot of soup is not too bad, but if I can get 15 servings out of it, that's what, a third of the cost of a restaurant for probably a serving twice as big, 3 times as big. So a fraction of the cost, like I said. This is why we cook. All right, so now you can see there's kind of individual grains of flour. I'm not sure if it's showing up on camera, but you can see there's specks that are darker than the ones around. And that's what's going to happen until this all kind of becomes uniform. That's why you got to keep it moving, because the pan is really only toasting what's directly contacting it. This oil is sort of deep frying the flour, but the further you get from the heat source, the longer it takes to brown. This is looking awesome. So you can tell I got all the water out of here, by the way, because there has not been any steam coming out of this except maybe right after I put the flour in. You can also see that that this whole thing is liquid again. Remember when it was like super clumped up when I first added most of the flour? It's going to go back to that as this thickens more. But it's not from water loss. There's no steam coming out of this pan. It's just the nature of the flour browning and how it reacts to it. And I think I did have too much flour. This is flour I didn't add, but I think I probably had 2 full cups, maybe a little more in there. I didn't measure 2 exactly. And I'm guessing I needed about 1 3/4 cups here, which is what I got. So now I would still add more flour if I felt I needed it up until maybe 2 minutes ago. Now it feels a little late. It's not really. I mean, you can add flour here. I just think like the stuff that's almost burned, you know, if I take this up to the color I want it, that stuff will burn a little more. It'll probably all be fine after it cooks out, because this is only cooking here for like 10 minutes while I'm stirring it, maybe 15 minutes while I'm stirring it, but it's going to cook for another 3 or 4 hours, and it really is cooking out the flour. That's like, you're cooking out that raw flour taste. That's the main reason that you have to let your gumbo cook for as long as you do, is to cook the roux out. So I could probably get away with adding flour here if I really wanted to, but look how thick this already is. I don't think I need it. And that little flour has more chance to hurt my roux than to help it, I think. Also, I've made a batch of gumbo in this pot before where I just made way too much roux, and it was like the thickest gumbo that I've ever had. It was crazy. I definitely should have diluted it. I just didn't have enough stock, and I didn't want to do it with just water, but honestly, I could have gotten away with it. The stuff was almost espresso. It was just thick and roasty, and it was delicious. I loved it personally, but it was probably like for the hardcore gumbo fan only. You know, if you're looking for like an accessible Papados gumbo, this was not what you were looking for at all. Ooh, okay, that's one of those little flecks that would have burned me. It did burn me a little through the glove, but it would have left a mark on my skin, I can tell you from experience. Alright, still going very respectfully here. You can see this is much darker now. This is well past caramel. Or at least it's solidly in caramel, I guess. I wonder how that's showing up on camera, because I can definitely tell this is darker than before. But depending on how the light hits it, it's probably pretty similar looking on camera. So this is still real liquidy, but you can see when I draw through, we're almost, yeah, we're kind of still passing that sauce test. Is it thick enough to be a sauce? Well, if you coat the back of a spoon and run your finger through it, does it close or does it leave a gap? So we're doing the same thing on the bottom of the pot here. If I run my spoon through and I can see a line of the empty pan behind it, that's pretty thick liquid. Alright, this is good. I kind of want to crank the heat up a little bit because it feels like we've stalled, but I know from experience I don't really need to do that. This whole thing's hitting kind of a critical mass of temperature, and I'm starting to feel more sticking on the bottom. So if I turn it up, I'm going to get a lot more sticking on the bottom. Now this is where I really have to be careful not to burn myself. because when you're pulling against the sticking on the bottom, you got resistance, and it unsticks and your spoon slams forward. That's when you splash yourself. So you gotta apply enough pressure to get the stuff unstuck, but be really controlled about it and make sure you don't just burn the crap out of yourself. I cannot overemphasize how unpleasant it is to get hot roux stuck on your bare skin. It's got to feel, I don't know. There's a lot of ways to burn yourself. It's got to be one of the worst ones that I've personally experienced. Ooh, that was a little iffy right there. So a good stuck spot right there. All right. So as you pull those stuck spots out, you'll see kind of the solids accumulating in here, and as you continue to stir, they get incorporated back into the liquid. But that's like those little bits that I was talking about that are darker than the rest. You're kind of spreading those out, exposing new flour to the bottom of the pan. And that's got to be very clear. That's getting darker now. This is starting to approach hot chocolate color. Not quite like a Hershey's bar, but we're getting there. Just tore my glove. All this stirring pressure. Okay, so now at the sticking stage here becomes very important. This is like a slow and steady wins the race thing. You gotta not be haphazard. You want to scrape every bit of the bottom where it's burning, but carefully so you don't splatter on yourself. And no time to mess around here. You gotta keep it moving. This is the part. So before I could set this down for maybe a minute and walk away, and it probably wouldn't have burned the roux. But here, I don't think I could walk away for more than 5 seconds without burning it. Time is truly of the essence here. You've got to keep it moving. And the more I'm doing this, the less sticking I'm feeling on the bottom, and the darker you can see the roux is getting. But I'm not feeling no sticking. It's sticking pretty fast. If I waited 10 seconds, it would stick a lot. And I'd be over here scraping, and the stuff stuck over here would be burning. So, okay, and now, note this is smoke coming up. This is not steam. So the oil has hit its smoke point. And the flour is toasting. Let me turn that down just a hair. Boy, look how much darker that is now. Okay, we are getting into Hershey's bar territory. We're not there yet. This is sort of like melted Hershey bar, maybe. I don't know. But remember, we're going for certainly darker than this. And I never know until I get there. I don't have like a color chart. I should make one. So I can hold it up next to this and be like, are we there yet? But all right, so now look how thick that is. See, it's thickened back up again significantly. Oh man, that's hot. Okay. Really careful with it at this stage. Okay. So I've said over and over, you only have seconds to spare when it gets to where it's going. So what am I going to do to cool it down? And what you do is take all those vegetables that you chop. So it's the trinity. You get your onion, celery, and bell pepper, and you toss them right in here. And they start steaming immediately. They get a little caramelized in this extremely hot oil and flour mixture, but they also release a bunch of water that will do two things. It helps to deglaze the pan here and it lowers the temperature a little bit and stops things from burning, because you got all this steam all of a sudden that's gonna, all this water added to the party. Okay, look how much darker that is now. We are definitely in chocolate bar territory now. I'm taking this further. But look, it's not even acting like a liquid anymore. That's how you know it's getting good. And this is where I think a lot of people chicken out. They might look at this and assume it's burned. Look at all this smoke that's coming up. Look how dark it is. No, this is not burned. This is exactly what you want this to do. And by continuing to keep it moving here, I am walking right on the knife's edge of making this better and better without ruining it. And we're not going to go coffee black because that is just probably a burned roux. But yeah, man, this is really getting there. Okay. Ooh, okay, this is uniformly very dark. Let's drop the heat, flatten it out real quick. I'm going to stir this about maybe one more minute. Yes. I want to make sure it's all dark. Ooh, that's hot. Okay. Alright, now this is the basis. This is the basis of our gumbo. Alright, we are almost as dark as we can get here without burning it. And if you can see the color that we're at here, the texture, it's really thick. Yeah, it's not acting like a liquid at all anymore. Very much a thick slurry. So certainly no water left in here. The oil fully absorbed by all the flour. The flour richly toasted. It's going to be nutty. Okay. Well, that's it. That's what we're going for right there. You notice, got to take it off the heat. But since I held it all in the same place for a few seconds, I'm going to stir it again before I grab these veggies. Okay, I'm leaving the heat on, coming back with veggies, and here we go. That's bell pepper and some onion. Start stirring that. Get some of that stuff off the bottom. This is more onion and celery. Okay, let's get to stirring. Okay, I'm also immediately adding some salt to release moisture from these vegetables. Okay. Now the goal here is twofold. I want to get as much of that roux up off the bottom of the pan as I can. It will burn if it's just sitting there with no moisture getting to it. And I want to coat these vegetables so they get kind of caramelized in here a little bit. Kind of roasting, well, not roasting. It's almost like deep frying them. We're extracting, a little flavor, caramelize them just a little bit. And on the same note, I want to put some bay leaves in now, and I kind of want those to caramelize up a little bit in here too, or at least have a chance to get exposed directly to the heat before I add liquid. Okay, get those in there. So now I want to add some spices. This is a mix of smoked paprika and cayenne. Add, I don't know, probably not enough, maybe 3 or 4 tablespoons there. And then I want a ton of black pepper. More than I can really get out of this grinder. I gotta get a better pepper grinder. Been grinding all day with this thing, end up with a 1/4 teaspoon. You know what? You got this disposable one I had for a camping trip. It actually grinds a lot faster. This one's rainbow peppercorn, so it's not just black pepper, but it's all going to come out in the wash. Never seen gumbo with too much black pepper in it. I bet it's possible, but not before my arm falls off. Okay. Might even add more later if my arm's got it in it. Okay. Get some stirring going here. Okay, so important to note, this wouldn't taste good, and it won't even smell that good until this roux starts cooking out. But you can definitely tell things are happening. These are those jalapenos. And here's a bunch of garlic. It's more garlic than I need. Oops. Oh well. A little extra garlic never hurt most people, right? It's a little vampire test. Now garlic almost immediately starts becoming fragrant. You don't want it to burn. So we're just going to give it a stir for a few seconds here, and then I'm going to hit this with some liquid. Make sure that garlic doesn't burn and fully deglaze what's on the bottom there. It smells amazing, actually. Alright. So this is some extremely concentrated chicken stock I made like a week ago, basically a demi-glace. Let's see how thick that is. A lot of nice collagen in there. This is what I made. Get some fat on top. I'm just going to leave in there. This is the one I made with the scraps from everything else that's in here. There. Get all that good stuff out of there, and as you can see, that is way too thick to just be the base of a soup. I'm going to add some water. Alright, so still have a lot of stuff to put in here with the chicken and the sausage. Leave some water on the side. Alright, let's get all that water mixed in there. Some good stuff. You can hear it deglazing. I can feel the stuff that's sticking on the bottom coming up since I've added that water. And there's a little bit of, this was in the bottom of the gumbo grease, so it's like gumbo solids from last time, plus a little more grease. All flavor, all going in. Alright, doing a little clean as we go. Getting all those empty containers over by the sink. Oh man, it's weird stirring it once you add all the liquid and it suddenly isn't, you know, laborious to turn over. I don't need to feel like my arm's falling off now. Alright, that's looking great. So, we can just add the sausage and the chicken now. But they're just going to lose flavor to the broth, of course. But they are just going to lose flavor the longer they're in. So I'm going to let this all come up to a boil first, turn it down, and then I'm going to add the sausage and the chicken in just a few minutes. Chicken. That's good. Hardly anything stuck in the bottom now, all deglazed. And not a ton of little black specks floating around in here, which I have had before when I burned too much stuff in the course of making the roux. And then at this stage you can see black chunks and little black flecks floating around in here. They never affect the taste, but cosmetically I can tell I burned it. I do see tiny little ones here and there, but also some of that is from like the sausage. Little bits that were legitimately caramelized on from there, and some of it may be black pepper from that very coarse pepper grinder that I use. So all in all, this is looking fantastic. So we only added like about a tablespoon of salt here. The sausage has some salt. I did season the chicken before I put it in, but this is a big pot of stew, and I don't salt my stock when I make it. So this is definitely going to need more salt down the road. I don't think it's important to introduce it at this stage. We can salt to taste later after we've added the other stuff in. I do think we're going to want more of the other seasonings as well, possibly. So you always want to season to taste. I just wanted to make sure to get most of it in when it had a chance to kind of expose to the direct heat with the roux and the vegetables before we get all this liquid in there. How much does it all matter? Well, that's the eternal question. This is also the stage where I always look at this and say, man, I definitely could have cooked the roux longer, but the reality is this is going to look darker after it cooks out. And once I've added in this other stuff, this is going to be a really thick stew, and you can see why I was saying I might have to dilute this. I mean, look how many vegetables are in here. These are going to lose most of their mass and become more broth, but all of this other stuff, plus these aren't going to go away completely. This is going to be a really thick stew, and I probably need like another, 32 ounces of water, at least more than this pot can hold, just to get it to the consistency. Well, not so much the consistency I would like it. I'll eat it as thick as it comes out, but I would just like to get more out of it. I think I could get another 4 bowls, 8 bowls out of it if I dilute it without even noticing practically, because it's so rich. So again, biggest pot I've got. I would love a huge one. I don't know, maybe one that sits across 2 burners on here if I can make that work. Maybe I got to get a camp stove in the kitchen, do a big one that way. Or just something that fits on this burner, but it's just another 6 inches taller. It'd be a little awkward to stir the roux in. Maybe I have to make the roux in a different pot. But I'd be able to make more gumbo. More gumbo is best gumbo. Also, I can make larger batches of homemade spaghetti sauce, and I like to make a big old pot of pork and meatballs and sausage. Homemade sauce, and capacity is always my limiting factor. We're starting to see steam up here, so it's starting to come to a boil. Lots of steam coming now. Start seeing little foamy bubbles in here. Any minute now. I crank the heat up a little bit because I just need to bring this to a boil. Nothing's going to burn. There's so much water in there. So it's okay to rush this a little bit. Just got to remember to turn it down. Don't want to leave it on high. I don't even want to have it on high until this boils, just until it starts to, or until it shows some signs that it's going to. Then I'll crank it down a little bit because the stove stays really hot. Lots of steam coming up. Get some nice foamy bubbles like I talked about. Crank it down a little bit. All right, looking so good. It really is one of my favorite things to make. It's a lot of work, but a lot of things are a lot of work. I'm not sure this is really that much more work than making like a homemade bolognese or something. It is a little higher risk because of the roux. That part feels like more work just because there's like danger involved and risk of ruining the whole thing. And of course, like I said, I have injured myself pretty severely doing it before, so you know, it's not a hypothetical risk. But it is worth it. The danger is more than justified by the reward. In the grand scheme of things, it's pretty minimal danger. And the reward is awesome, awesome gumbo that is just starting to boil now. It's just starting to bubble up here. Okay, good deal. Starting to see these opaque white bubbles come up. Sort of like foam in the cracks in between the vegetables here. Just crank it all the way to high real quick and getting impatient. Yeah, lots of these little bubbles forming. You can see these little areas of opaque white in here. That's all bubbles coming up from the bottom. That's how you know it's about to boil. Alright, that is moving around a little on its own, almost totally opaque and bubbly on top. I don't need a rolling boil here, I just need the whole thing to be hot. We are there. I'm going to give it like another minute and then throw this sausage in. Go. Some real bubbles coming up there. See it moving around on its own here. Okay, perfect. So like I said, I don't need a rolling boil. Just want to know it's almost there. In with the sausage. Yeah. There we go. Sausage is already pretty hot, so it's not going to cool this down very much. And you can probably see, I might, even with holding back on the water, I don't think I'm going to be able to fit all this in there until some of this steams off. So, doesn't matter, we're going to try. It's as hot as it gets. So there's no rush on adding this, actually. And this is actually also cold. This came out of the fridge. So if I add it, it's gonna bring this down below this boiling point, so it's not gonna steam for a little bit. So it's gonna be tough to make room for the rest of it. I'll have to come back, I'll have to bring it back up to heat, let it steam off for a bit, and then add more chicken. So instead, I'm gonna let this just sit here, steam off for a minute or two. Turn that heat down a little bit because I don't want a rolling boil. And after this has lost just a little bit of that volume, we'll go ahead and add the chicken. And this is quite a thick gumbo already in terms of ingredients. Like the broth will still thicken up a lot, but there's a lot in here. Not difficult to stir, but you can feel all the weight on your spoon. There's a lot of stuff in there. 2 large onions, 3 huge bell peppers, 6, 7 stalks of celery, 6 or 7, yeah, maybe even 8 cloves of garlic, 3, unfortunately, very small jalapenos. That's the only thing. If I had access to more, I would have put like 3 to 4 large jalapenos in, and I would have de-seeded them. Instead, I put in 3 very small jalapenos without de-seeding them. I just wish I had a little more than that, but I can always add heat with the cayenne. That's the primary way that you add heat, through the seasoning. And so I'm going to give it a little taste just a little ways down the road. The roux won't have cooked through, but I'll be able to get a sense for how spicy it is and whether I need to add more seasoning. Because the cayenne and smoked paprika are a huge part of the flavor profile. The roux is the largest part, followed probably by the andouille, followed by the seasoning, and then of course how well seasoned your chicken is before you add it, because you're adding cooked chicken, so you always season that before you cook it. And that's one thing. I didn't have a lot of time to prep this. Usually I would have dry brined the chicken in the fridge for a full day, but I only had a chance to do it for maybe an hour or 2 on the counter before I put these in the oven, so they don't have quite as much salt in them as usual, but it's still going to be fine. Plenty of salt in the total soup. They're going to absorb great flavor from this. They're going to release excellent seasoning back into the soup, along with some fat, though I did trim these up pretty good, and they were bone in, and I pulled the meat from the bone and left behind a lot of the little bits that you would you might trim away or spit out if you were eating a thigh on the bone. All that stuff went into the stock. So we got kind of a rolling boil. Don't really need that. Crank it down now. Just need this to steam, just simmer. Crank it down to about, just like low. About 25% of the way on my electric stove dial there. Now, if you're on gas, yours is much more responsive to your temperature controls, whereas I've got the glass top electric here, and it just holds heat forever. So even though I've got this on super low, this is still pretty damn hot. But you might need to keep it higher if you're cooking on gas. You might not want to play with the knob in quite the same way that I have here. You just put it at the temperature you want it. When you need it lower, turn it down. When you need it higher, turn it up. Whereas I have to kind of play the long game here. Look at some of this stuff. This is the onion that we put in there. Look how nicely caramelized that looks. You can see some of the vegetables, really did pick up some meaningful color when we tossed them with the roux. Some of them not so much, but there's just little bits where you can see that was worth it. We added just a little more depth of flavor. I mean, you could add raw vegetables. You could do the stock first if you wanted. I've never done it that way. And my understanding is the way I've shown here is pretty traditional. And normally this is how you arrest the the roux and keep it from burning. I think you might have splatter issues if you just add water directly to the roux at the temperature where we added the vegetables. I think adding the vegetables and then letting them steam is sort of a gentle way to introduce water that doesn't cause splattering and does still cool it down, because you're adding a bunch of cold stuff and then spreading out the roux by coating that stuff in it. And I think it rapidly brings the temperature down, but in a gentle way that doesn't create any sort of violent reaction or splatter. Okay. So we've lost quite a bit of volume already. I'm not sure if you can see here, but where I've been stirring it, it's been rising up a little bit here, but about half of that distance is volume that we've lost from the steam. So let me go ahead and add this chicken. And see where it goes from there. If I just dump this in, it's going to splash everywhere. I'm going to go ahead and use these tongs, because this is all packed in here, barely fit in this container. This is kind of a silly way to do this, but okay, you know what? I may be on camera, but let's go ahead and just get in there with my hands. That's what the gloves are for. And you could do this barehanded too. I just happen to have gloves on, so I don't have to get all this grease directly on my hands. There we go. Glad to be adding this gently. I do not want to splash any of this goodness out of the pot. We just spent so long getting it where we wanted it. So you can see these are big pieces of chicken for the most part. They're way bigger than a bite size. That's totally fine. They're going to cook in here for like 3 hours. So they're going to break down quite a bit. And when they don't, you know, I'll break it up a little bit when I kind of stir it before I start putting it away or serving bowls of it. But getting a big chunk of chicken in your bowl isn't a big deal. It's going to be super tender, you know, spoon tender. You're going to be able to eat it just fine. And this is going to be thick, rich gumbo where every bite ought to have some of everything that's in it. And if you're not having a bite with all the ingredients in it, it's because you chose not to. And nothing wrong with that either, because I love the broth. The broth is my favorite part of the gumbo, pretty much. So, you know, no shame in just trying to fish for a bite that's all broth. It can be tricky though, because there's so much stuff in here. And there's a catch-22, obviously, where the less stuff you put in, the more broth you have, and the less flavored that broth is. This is going to be an incredibly rich broth. That little half-inch extra that we let the level go down by letting that steam turned out to be crucial. We have just about 3/4 of an inch, maybe an inch to the top of the pot here, which gives us enough room to stir. If you take it right to the brim, you can't stir it. And if you turn it up so that it bubbles and steams to bring the level down, it's going to bubble right over the edge. So this is as full as this pot can get. I'm going to wash my gloved hands here so I can come back and stir without getting grease on the spoon. And this water sitting to the side is going to make its way in here eventually, because this is going to continue. Well, I'm going to turn it back up a little bit since I just added all that cold chicken. I need to bring it back to a simmer. And so good thing I left that space, because I'm able to shove all that chicken under the surface here, give it a little stir. Ooh, that is a full pot. Man, look at that. I push it from over here. Oh, that way I can go through. What about from this side? Push from here, almost nothing. You can see everything moving. Yeah, this is full to the brim. Big kind of solid chunk of chicken in there from what you just saw me put into the container. Of course, that's all going to break up as I poke it with the spoon and as the heat gets to it. Okay, so I'm going to stop messing with this for now. Next thing I'm going to do, burn my tongs a little, oops. Next thing I'm going to do is let this do its thing. I'm going to have it come back up to a simmer. I crank the heat up here. I'm going to turn it back down to a low. I'm going to put this lid on it, 3/4 coverage, something like that, so it doesn't steam out too fast and lose too much volume. As it does boil and lose volume, I'm going to add this water back in, because really the purpose here is to cook the ingredients, to cook out the roux, extract great flavor from the sausage and chicken, let all these flavors meld together. We're extracting most of the moisture from these vegetables, so they're not going to have crunch. They're just going to be, contributed to the broth. All that stuff's got to cook, but I don't want to lose the volume. I want every bit of this and maybe even more after it's done, so I'm going to keep adding water probably every 20-30 minutes, give it a little stir, and the whole thing's going to cook for about 3 hours or until I just can't wait anymore and I have my first bowl. But I'll leave it on the stove until it's time to go to bed tonight. Last thing I'll do is put this away, either just leave it on the stove and let the whole thing cool and stick this whole pot in my fridge, or if I have enough time, I'll let it cool completely and then I'll divvy it out into containers like this one so I can start getting them ready to share with family and friends, put some in my freezer, some in my fridge, just whatever works out. Both of those are totally fine. I've had a pot like this in my fridge that I just served myself bowls from over the course of a week and killed the whole thing, but more often I want to save some and share some around. This time I'm really excited. I finally arranged something I've been wanting with my brother-in-law for a long time, which is an exchange of my chicken and sausage gumbo for his wife's pozole verde. So I'm going to get a little quart for quart exchange going and hope I can find a couple other people who want to share some delicious soup with me. I'm happy to share some of this. Another reason I need to dilute it though, because this is such concentrated goodness. Maybe I give someone just a small container and tell them to add that much water to it again, so you get their money's worth out of it. But anyway, thank you very much. If you have watched through this whole thing, really appreciate your investment in the process with me here, and hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Can't wait to eat the finished product. Thanks a bunch. Bye.